In studying Buddhism, we spent a lot of time on the life of the Buddha because the Buddha's story and later additions to his story feature so prominently in Buddhist art. Muhammad is really almost as important to Islam, but his life story appears much less frequently in art. There's a simple but important reason for this. Islam forbids the depiction of zoomorphic images, that is, images of humans and animals. Nevertheless, the practices that Muhammad established, even as we'll see, the structure of his house in Medina, are vitally important to Islam and to Islamic art, especially Islamic architecture. So let's begin with a video introduction to the life of Muhammad. But first, I want to warn you, or maybe promise you, that you're going to hear less from me and more from two videos, one on Islam and one on Islamic art and architecture. I took this approach because so much of our study of Islamic art will focus on great mosques. They are truly monumental in size. They serve as major social gathering places, and they are splendidly decorated. All of these features show up better on video than on still photographs. Sorry about how this video cuts off. Whoever edited it for YouTube segments broke it into very awkward segments. At any rate, we're going to continue with Muhammad's story. But first, I want to switch videos and look at the way in which Muhammad's home in Medina helped shape the future plan of the mosque. By the way, Islam gives you a big break here. I at least found the varieties of Buddhism dizzyingly confusing. There are some important splits in Islam as well, most notably the rift over who should be Muhammad's successor, a schism which led to the division of Islam into Sunni and Shia branches. This division or schism is incredibly important and has led to enormous bloodshed over the years, very much including the present. The wars now going on in Iraq and Syria are really a Sunni Shiite civil war. However, this schism is less important for art. Sunni and Shia mosques follow pretty much the same plan, although there are some decorative differences that are more cultural than religious in origin. So, on to Muhammad's house. And now we're going to resume our history of the life of Muhammad and the founding of Islam. Notice that from the very beginning, Islam was associated with war and conquest, and that in Islamic societies, political and religious rule were combined. There is no separation of mosque and state. Note, too, the central role played by the Kaaba, the holy house in Mecca, that is the epicenter of the Hajj. Your book doesn't show this image, perhaps because it's not all that interesting from an artistic or architectural standpoint, but nevertheless, the Kaaba is an extremely important sacred space. The Kaaba is the central shrine of Islam, a place that all pious Muslims are called upon to visit once in their lifetime. Here you see throngs of Muslims circumambulating the Kaaba. Remember the great stupa and circumambulation? But Muslims, as the video explains, walk in a counterclockwise circle, a deliberate gesture to indicate that this is not nature worship, that Allah is beyond time and place. The Kaaba originally contained 360 idols that probably represented the days of the year. But by Muhammad's day, the Kaaba was venerated as the shrine of Allah, the High God. So once a year, tribes from all around the Arabian Peninsula, whether Christian or pagan, and there were a lot of Christians in this area at this time, they would converge on Mecca to perform the Hajj, marking the widespread conviction that Allah was the same deity worshipped by all monotheists. Inside the Kaaba is the black stone, venerated in pre-Islamic times and now the focal point of the Kaaba. The Quran states that God instructed Abraham, together with his son Ishmael, to raise the foundations of the holy house on this site. After Abraham had built the Kaaba, an angel brought him the black stone, a celestial stone that, according to tradition, had fallen from heaven onto a nearby hill. By the way, there is speculation that this stone may be part of a meteor. As you might expect, Islamic authorities have not been willing to let scientists examine it. At any rate, the black stone is believed by Muslims to be the only remnant of the original structure made by Abraham. Abraham then received a revelation in which Allah told him to go and proclaim the pilgrimage to the Kaaba to mankind. And this is the origin of the Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And yes, you need to know the 5 pillars of Islam. Even more, you need to understand how the mosque is designed to reflect these beliefs and to help Muslims meet their religious responsibilities and to worship. That's what your exam essay and your long essay are really asking for. You saw this slide in the podcast on your test essays, and we're going to return to it again. But now that we've reviewed the 5 pillars of Islam, I want to stop and make the very important point that to understand the mosque, any mosque, you need to see it as a building dedicated to these basic elements of the Muslim faith. The mosque is a place of testimony. The word is proclaimed at the minbar or stepped pulpit, unfortunately not shown on this plan. Worshippers are called to prayer from the minaret. Prayer is conducted in the prayer hall, in this case represented by the area with pillars, and the mihrab shows the way to Mecca and the direction in which to pray. The wall in which the mihrab is placed is the Qibla wall. That's Qibla. You'll see this word on a subsequent slide. Ritual cleansing and community took place in the courtyard. We're going to come back to this plan, as I said. For now, we're going to move on to the remarkable spread of Islam as the first group of caliphs transfer the Muslim capital to Damascus in what today is Syria. So here's a rather fuzzy picture of a minbar or stepped pulpit. The mosque is in Kazakhstan. The reading and preaching of the word is very important to the Muslim faith. We'll see a splendid example of a mihrab, or the niche in the Qibla wall facing Mecca, in my next lecture on Islamic art. Well, we're skipping around in the textbook, and now we're paying a price for it. Islamic art, and especially Islamic architecture, was heavily influenced by the Byzantines, who we'll study in our next unit. Our focus will be on the mosque as a center of Muslim worship in this unit. Some of our technical discussion of architectural elements such as domes, squinches, and pendentives will wait for the next unit. Islam spread with extraordinary speed. Muhammad's armies had conquered Arabia by his death in 632. The areas in light blue were conquered under the first 4 caliphs, and the Umayyad caliphs from their new capital in Damascus went on to conquer the areas in green in less than 100 years. The Dome of the Rock is located on a rocky outcrop known as Mount Moriah, where, according to Jewish belief, Abraham offered his son Isaac as a sacrifice. The inscriptions inside the building glorify Islam as the final true revelation and the culmination of the faiths of Judaism and Christianity, which Islam believes contain important truths, and particularly the truth of monotheism. There is no God but Allah. The building is actually not a mosque, but a ciborium, that's Ciborium, erected over a sacred site. There's a very important mosque nearby as part of the same complex. The Dome of the Rock is located at the visual center of a platform known as the Temple Mount. It was constructed on the site of the second Jewish temple, which was destroyed during the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE. Remember those phrases on the Arch of Titus? It was originally the site of a Christian church. Muslims also believe that this is the place where Muhammad ascended to heaven, accompanied by the angel Gabriel. This aerial view makes it easier to see the Dome of the Rock as an octagonal construction. And these photos give you a sense of the rich tile ornamentation typical of Islamic art. Green, by the way, is the traditional color associated with Islam. You'll see it on flags, for example. And as you've learned, it has a strong association with paradise. But blue in the Middle Eastern tradition is the color of protection. And vivid blues tend to characterize Islamic decorative tiles. Notice, too, the great importance associated with the words of the Quran. Calligraphy, or decorative writing, is one of the most characteristic features of Islamic art. The words portrayed on the tile are usually from the Quran, but sometimes they come from other sacred texts. Since the Quran forbids images, Islamic artists channeled their creativity into geometric, and floral designs and into calligraphy. I in particular love these tiles. And so I'm showing you some more. Here's another image of the tile work on the Dome of the Rock. Again, note the strip of calligraphy. And here you see some of the splendid interior mosaic decoration. These mosaics were actually created by Christian artists from Byzantium, where mosaics had evolved into a very high art. When you get to Byzantine art, you will see that the absence of human and animal figures represents an important departure from the Byzantine mosaic tradition. You'll recognize the domed octagon when we study the Byzantine church of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, a very important church in this course. The Muslims borrowed heavily from Byzantine Christian art, just as Byzantine Christians borrowed heavily from Rome. The dome was especially appropriate for mosques or other holy places because it provided a large open space for communal prayer, and the soaring roof lines turned thoughts of believers heavenward. We're going to focus on mosques more than other structures of Islamic culture, but note again in this palace the abstract decorations on the frieze. Most Islamic sculpture took the form of friezes. Standalone sculpture made less sense for abstract imagery, and it raised the danger that statues would be worshipped as images. As we'll see, the Byzantine Christians had the same concern. Note also the palace's central courtyard, the gathering place of a palace as well as a mosque, and very characteristic of Islamic art, as it was, for that matter, of Roman house construction. The Umayyad caliphs were overthrown by the Abbasids in 750 CE, and they established a new Muslim capital in Baghdad. Perhaps the most famous mosque of the Abbasid era is this great, indeed monumentally huge, mosque in what today is Tunisia in North Africa. You've seen this plan before and may have wondered about all the dots. They're columns, a veritable forest of columns. This is a hypostyle mosque. Remember the Egyptian hypostyle temples? The columns broke up the prayer space, which may be why later mosques largely abandoned this style and used domes frequently. But note that there are domes over the mihrab, or niche facing Mecca. It is always placed in the Qibla wall, or the wall facing toward Mecca. The Maqsura was a space reserved for the ruler or his representatives. Islam was not, as I mentioned before, a religion that embraced the separation of mosque and state. Rulers were responsible for maintaining both political order and religious conformity, and Islam was a very important element of their legitimacy or claim to rule. Nevertheless, there has long been a tension between Muhammad's emphasis on social unity, the equality of believers, and responsibility to the poor, and the highly hierarchical society and huge disparities of wealth that arose in most Muslim societies. Of course, Christianity confronted similar contradictions, especially during the Middle Ages. Domes over the entryway and the mihrab again directed thoughts heavenward. One interesting note about mihrabs: they are always set in the Qibla wall, or the wall facing Mecca. But as Islam spread across the world, how did Muslims know just where they were in relationship to Mecca? I remember learning in my early history classes that Muslim scholars made huge strides in mathematics and the science of navigation. Turns out that the driving force between many of these discoveries was the need to determine the direction of Mecca. So art history taught me something new. Wondering where Mecca is from where you're sitting? There are several search engines on the web that help devout Muslims determine the direction they should turn to pray. I typed in the school address, and here you are. So here's that hypostyle hall, which for some reason is not shown in your book. The largest mosque in the world also dates from Abbasid rule. These photos should give you some sense of its monumental scale, but the most famous feature of this mosque is its spiral minaret. Note that this structure really served more of a political than a religious purpose, since it is too tall to call worshippers to prayer from this minaret, at least in the days before loudspeakers. Instead, this minaret signaled unmistakably that Allah ruled in the territory. We have not yet reached the period that your textbook refers to as later Islamic art, but I think this is enough to absorb for now. So I'll stop here and continue with the Great Mosque of Cordoba, the Shia mosques in Egypt and Iran, the works of the great Islamic architect Sihan, the decorative arts of Islam, and the splendid structures of the Mughal Empire in my final two lectures on Islamic art.